we go. Starting up. Perfect. And starting up our live streams so we can let all our viewers see everything. Perfect. Yes, so it's so wonderful to have you back on, Sandrine. I know we haven't talked in a long time.
Thank you.
And you always bring such liveliness and great information to these sessions. So thank you for joining us once again.
My pleasure, my pleasure. I like to be here. So we have to do that more often.
Yes, we do. Yes. And I know you, and last time we spoke to you were doing some more work with World at Work. You were doing some training sessions for them. And
yes, so I was just starting. I was just appointed the faculty. I've now delivered 3 or 4 global compensation immersion program, which is this new program that World at Work is having. And it's an interesting way to deliver. It's not like the GRP or the CCP, which are more like, I understand the trainers are more having to stick to what's written in there and kind of highlighting to the students, you know, this is what you need to remember. This is the important part and so on, to prepare them for the exam. Because there's not a certification at the end, we are able to change a few things, and we're actually encouraged to bring in our examples and so on. And what they do is that for each session, they put 2 faculty members together to deliver the training. So there's kind of a conversation and so on. And I've been so blessed, and I've met in particular 2 gentlemen who were really, I was really excited to present with them. And one of them was actually, I don't know if you know him, his name is Dr. Duncan Brown, or Professor Dr. Duncan Brown in the UK. He has written co-written quite a good number of the compensation and benefits books that CIPD students and so on are required to read. And I have quite a few. So when I was told one time that I would be delivering with him, and we were having this kind of pre-training conversation together, I was like, I have your books. I'm so excited. I was completely fan girl. And he said to me, oh, and I'm following you on LinkedIn, Sandrine. And I was like, you're following me? I couldn't even believe it. And we had so much fun presenting together. And I also met another gentleman who has been delivering the GRP for many, many years now, Alan Gibbons in the UK. Very, very nice. And then the first time I had 2 ladies, one in Australia, one in Spain. It's truly international. And it's very, very nice. There is a gentleman in Qatar. There is a gentleman, and my next session is going to be with a gentleman in Switzerland. So it's very nice because I also get to meet other people. And even if we're delivering the same session, because you're not always delivering with the same people, you know, it's kind of interesting to see how they approach things and so on. So I've really enjoyed doing that as well.
That's the best. That's great.
Yeah.
So you're doing. You have to let me know the next time you do a class with them. And we have some members on my team that would love to sign up.
Okay. I will let you know. I think there will be some sessions in July and October.
Oh, okay, good.
I will let you know.
Good. All right. Well, it is at the top of the hour, so I think we can go ahead and get started here. So just to kick things off, we're here at the Rewards Mastermind, and so we're a place where we can elevate the profession, talk about compensation and benefits and the trends that are going on around the world. And we often bring in great speakers like Sandrine Bardot. So we're so happy to have Sandrine with us. But as starting off as a introduction, I'm Sam Reeve. I'm with Comp Team and joined here with Howard Nisewitz as your hosts today. So we are currently multicasting across several different platforms such as LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. And we're also here on Zoom live. So if you happen to be with us here live, I mean, you can feel free to drop a message in the chat at any time if you have any questions. If you're on one of the other platforms, feel free to also drop it in the notes sections. We'll get to those after the session. and as we kick things off here. So today, I'm pleased to introduce Sandrine Bardot. She is a great friend and a wonderful practitioner of the Middle East and the Gulf area. So we're so pleased to have her here. She's going to let us know of what's been going on in the Middle East and through all these interesting times of in this VUCA world that we're in. We're going to be talking about things as what's happened through the pandemic, the Great Resignation and work-life balance trend and inflation and global unrest in general, and how rewards has evolved through that time and what is going on. So so pleased to have you here, Sandrine. Before we get started though, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into compensation and benefits and rewards overall, and your journey of how you're helping companies?
Okay, great question. So first I have a question for you. It's Ramadan at the moment. It's 8 p.m. in Dubai, and I don't know if you can hear the call for prayer. Actually, It's a prayer, not a call. Can you hear it? Is it disturbing because I can put my headsets?
No, actually.
No.
That's
You barely can hear it.
It's gonna last for at least 20 minutes, just to let you know. Okay. So
you can just barely hear it, but it's
okay. It's a special prayer. Special. Yeah, it's a special prayer during Ramadan. So how did I get started in Compenben? Well, many years ago, when I was young and fresh and I was a student, I decided to specialize in human resources in my business school. And at the time, there was not even a concept of compensation and benefits, or as we call it in French, rémunération et avantages sociaux. The closest we had was one HR director came to show us a payslip. You know, the French payslip is probably the most complex in the world, and she told us this is what we deal with, and that was it. Okay, so that was what I started doing. My first job, I was an HR analyst, and I actually started by working on my first thing that I did was a booklet to explain the Hey Job evaluation methodology. So the company sent me to learn the Hey Job evaluation methodology, write a booklet about it, because it was at the time what is now called as Airbus. It was not called Airbus at the time, but that was the French mother company. And they were merging with the Germans and the Spanish, and they were doing job evaluation because in order to make sure that each country had like kind of an equal share, they were looking at the number of points of the positions to make sure that, you know, if the VP of this is going to be from this nationality, then there should be one or two people of another nationality that are almost at the same level or something like that. So they were also using it for that. And we had on the site that I was working, a population of engineers and technicians, and we were doing missiles for the nuclear submarines. So that part of the site was completely closed off. And we were also doing Ariane Espace, the rocket launcher that was placing satellites from Google in French Guyana. And okay, I continued to do that. I did the salary grids for new hires and so on. And then I moved to Philips, and I did a job which was a mix of labor law and compensation and benefits. And it still didn't have a name. I was also an HR analyst, but I was doing salary negotiations, reductions in force, all this kind of stuff. I wrote something about the 36-hour week in our company, which was actually one of the templates that was used to write the 35-hour week law. Actually, I learned it on. I didn't know, but it was one of the examples that I used. And later on, I was hired by a company to become France Telecom, to become compensation and benefits manager. I said, oh, this title actually describes really well what I'm doing, you know? So that's how I officially became a Compenben person. And my next job, I moved to Italy and I became international. And since then, it has been an international story. So my first expatriation was in 1999 to Italy at the time. And I never looked back, and I've done international components ever since.
How exciting. Yes.
Nice journey.
So 29 years in compensation and benefits. Can you believe?
Yes, yes.
And now you can get my age. I'm 29, obviously. All right.
Yes. Well, tell us what's going on. I mean, a little bit about the Gulf countries and the typical trends you're seeing, and
Yes.
there's a lot of things that have been going on these past several years, and
Yes.
talking about the pandemic, turnover, work-life balance, inflation, those things. So how's the Gulf countries been dealing with those issues?
So lots of things. So I've prepared a few slides to maybe give the audience a little bit of background. So if you don't mind, I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Up, here we are. Okay. So basically, one of the things that people need to know, so I'm based in Dubai. It's part of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is made of the United Arab Emirates, where the capital is Abu Dhabi, but the most famous city is Dubai. So there's UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, KSA, Oman, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar. And in this part of the world, we host 10% of the global migrant population. It's a small part of the world. And we're definitely not 10% of the global population overall, but 10% of the global migrant population. Most of those migrants are coming from Indian subcontinent. So Indians, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. Then we have a large portion coming from the Philippines. And then what we call regional Arabs, which are Egyptians, Jordanians, Syrian, Palestinian, Iraqis, all sorts of what we call the regional Arabs. The nationals or the citizens of the countries are called the nationals. So the nationals are the Emiratis, the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Bahrainis, the Omanis, and so on. And in the UAE, for example, we only have 10 to 11% of the population, about 1 million out of 10 million, which is locals. So as you can imagine, in their own country, they are the small minority. There are more Emiratis than French in the UAE, yes, but still they're a minority in their own country. The only country where the locals are more than the expats is the Saudi Arabia, because it's a bigger country and they have comparatively fewer. They have more in total, but they have comparatively fewer expats. So all locals are called expats. It's not an expatriate like in the sense of international assignees that you would have from other parts of the world who are sent, on a second-man contract or sometimes on a local plus contract. Everybody is hired on a local contract, but also everybody, including the nationals, has a base pay, a housing allowance, and then various allowances that depend on the company and so on, but like transportation, mobile phone for child, for this, that, and the other, all sorts of allowances. And in most cases, the package is the monthly guaranteed package is about 50% to 60% on base pay and 50 to 40% or 40 to 50% on allowances. Mm-hmm. So that's for everybody, including the nationals. So the nationals get a housing allowance as well. Even though
Sandrine, the main reason why having the different allowances, is it more cultural or is it tax beneficial? I mean, what is the main driver?
There is no tax advantage because there is no tax at all. So except for Americans who are paying tax on their global income. So too bad for you guys. But for the rest of the world, we don't have income tax. We don't have social security. We don't have any of that. I think what happened? Those countries used to be under British rule until the late 60s, early 70s. And the first people who came there when the oil was discovered at the end of the 50s, early 60s, were British and American expatriates. And so at the time they came in compounds, they came with all those advantages that all the international assignees were having. And then everybody copied that. And that's how everybody's paid now. So that's why we have this kind of situation. But we're not, for most of us, there are maybe a few people who are pure international assignees, but most of us are not attached to our home country in any way, shape, or form from a social security and benefits point of view. We're purely all on local contracts, but with this pay package, which is composed this way. So as I was showing to you, not only the nationals are not very numerous in their own countries, but they're also even less numerous in the private sector, because for those who are working, who are also, depending on the country, mostly male, especially, for example, Kuwait, it's mostly the Kuwaiti males that are working. Most of them work for government. There is a thing of prestige to work with the government. I think historically, because there is this kind of social contract between the rulers of the country who own the country, literally they own the country, and their citizens. There is a social pact that they cannot get those jobs for life with the government. I mean, they need to do something really, really bad to lose the job. I mean, punch the boss, steal money, I don't know, do something terrible, okay? But typically they stay in the job. The other thing which is surprising in a lot of cases, most of the time, government jobs pay more than private sector jobs. So what would be the incentive for anybody to work in the private sector if they're paid less? They're probably expected to do a little bit more as well. And they don't have the safety guaranteed employment. I mean, obviously, they are not so keen on working in the private sector. Now, what's happening is that there is a massive demographic boom in those countries for the nationals, even though up to not this generation, but the previous generation, where the ladies were having 5, 8, some of my friends, they have 9 brothers and sisters from the same mother, not even from second wife or anything like that. But nowadays, the Emirati ladies have 2, 3 kids, they have them later, but still the population is booming. A huge proportion of the population is below the age of 25, generally speaking, for all GCC countries. I think we can say at least 65% of the population is below the age of 25. And so governments are looking to the future and they're like, we can't afford, we will have so many young graduates. Now we have better healthcare, people live longer. We are not going to be able to afford to continue to give those jobs in the public sector. There is productivity improvement, digitization, automation also happening in the government. And so they're trying to help and push their nationals to work in the private sector. But as you can see in Qatar, it's like not even, I don't know, 1% or less than 1%. And even in Saudi Arabia, I don't know what that number is, but it's like 10% of the whole population in the private sector. So in the private sector, you have typically non-nationals, and in the government, you have typically mostly nationals. And then you have what we call semi-government entities, which are funded by government money, but submitted to a private labor law. And those are like typically the companies that government puts in place to diversify its economy. And in those, you have like kind of a good mix between the nationals and the expats, like 50-50, sometimes a little bit more, but that's a little bit more mixed. So this is kind of the general background of how we work in this part of the world.
Yes, very different. And when we're comparing those to US, European, so it's definitely different, because in the US, of course, a government job is not paid as well as public sector. So I mean, or the private sector. So it's definitely flip-flopped.
Yes, because but it's the same in Europe. In Europe, if you work for government, you get job safety, but you don't get career opportunity as much, or it's less meritocratic. It's more about tenure, and you get less pay. That's typical. But over there, it's different. It's changing, but it's still different. The other thing is that, and I've highlighted this from the latest State of the Workplace statistics from Gallup. Basically, the region is one of the least engaged on a global basis. And just to let you know, when you have a pink color for the number, it means that this is the highest percentage in the statistic. And the pink background means the pink number means it's more than the global number, and the pink background means it's the worst on a global basis. So as you can see, COVID has affected people's life a lot. People experience daily anger and sadness a lot more, actually the most in the world.
Wow.
I think I'm going to make an assumption here because I'm not in people's heads, but I think that there are two types of countries in the MENA region. So in the Gulf countries where you have lots of expats, obviously, if you're dependent on having a work to have a visa and you're feeding a whole family, because that's what most people do, except maybe the Westerners, you're much more stressed when things are bad from an economic point of view. And also because traditionally, it has been so easy for companies to replace people because there was such a massive influx of people that they didn't really care, and you could easily get tossed by a company. So obviously that induces a lot of stress. In the rest of the Middle East and North Africa region, I would say the situation is different, is that those countries are in bad economic situation for most of them. And so obviously it creates its own set. So they don't have lots of expats and this kind of stuff, but they have their own set of worries and stress, which is also compounded by a specific, think of Syria, think of Iraq, think of even Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, Algeria. Those are countries where there have been, you were talking of unrest. There was unrest in the past. It still has economic repercussions nowadays. And it's compounded by COVID. It's compounded by crisis in Ukraine, which is causing food shortages, all this kind of stuff. So a lot of things happening. So I think this is where this is coming from.
So to dive in a little bit into this more detail here, is understanding why perhaps some of the Gulf states are impacted more greatly over the past few years. Do you think it's because of a lot of the individuals are hired by the government, so there's more of the affiliation of being involved with the government and contributing to the country's success and so forth, but is there more command and control structure where people's lives are being more dictated from the top versus employees having more power over what they would like to see in their workplace?
So I would say in government, it's mostly the nationals who work there, and they're very proud to support their country. Yes. And to be honest, if you think of the short history that most of those countries have as independent states, they are 50, the UAE just celebrated in this last December, 4 months ago, its 50th anniversary. It's not an old country as an independent country as such. And so when you see the level of achievement that they've done in 50 years, that's amazing. And the Emiratis are proud, the Saudis are proud, the Kuwaitis are proud, and rightfully so. I think, but they only represent a small portion of the working population in their countries, right? For the rest who work in semi-government or in private sector, this is still a society which is very much based on a caste system. It's not an official caste system like it used to be in India, but we know that typically at the bottom of the ladder, you find labor people who tend to come from the Asian subcontinent, we're starting to see some Africans, but there were no Africans whatsoever when I first arrived in the UAE 15 years ago. Now there are some I don't really know. They do taxi driver and so on. So that's not completely the bottom. There is still lower levels. We see some Chinese people. Some of them come when it's like on construction site. The Chinese company will bring the whole from the same area, and they kind of live in autarky. They don't really mix with the rest. But you see typically the Asians, like the sub-Indian continental Asians, tend to be in this kind of labor positions. Mm-hmm. Then you have a layer of people who work in service jobs, retail, food and beverage, all this kind of stuff. There you see also some Indians and Pakistanis, you see lots of Filipinos, you see some Africans, some regional Arabs. Then you have like kind of, let's say, first layers of management, lots of Lebanese, Jordanian, regional Arabs there. Some Indians and Pakistanis as well. And then in senior management, you tend to have Westerners, of course, nationals, but Westerners mostly. And also sometimes, you know, some highly educated Indians and Pakistanis and some Lebanese people, but mostly, like when times are good, it's mostly Westerners. So yeah, and I guess that their origins has an impact on their perception of their work environment. If you're like me, you know, like you're a Westerner, you're highly paid, you're treated well. If you're a poor laborer coming from Bangladesh, your conditions of life are very, very different, and that's unfortunately a reality. Now, they have made a lot of progress in how those labor employees are treated. And especially, I have to say, in the UAE, it's not because I'm based, but I've seen the difference myself in the last 15 years in their life conditions. But I mean,
yes,
we wouldn't want to live like that still. It's better, but it's still not great.
So is it your experience that the managers of these the company and these government organizations and companies that in the private sector are very, I mean, they must be very good at working with a lot of these different cultures and understanding the needs and of these different peoples. Would you agree?
Yes and no, I will say. What you find is that you have two types of private organizations. You have some companies that are mostly made of one nationality, and you will see that 99% of employees are Indian or Pakistani or something like that. And so they kind of recreate their own culture inside. And then in the semi-government entities and the multinationals, you have an explosion of diversity, okay? So when I was the global head of performance and reward for Majid Al Futtaim, which is one of the largest conglomerates in the region, my own team, 13 employees, 13 nationalities. I mean, it was great. We were always celebrating something, you know, like the whole year and learning. But we are also all English speaker as a second or third language. And we have to learn a lot in order to, there are lots of things that when you are a manager in your own country, you don't even need to think about, because there are some cultural assumptions that you can make about most people. But when one of your employees, Canadian, from native Canadian side, another employee is Sudanese, another employee is Emirati, another employee is Indian, another employee is Pakistani, you have lots and lots of things that culturally you don't really think about in the beginning, and then you discover that you need to learn and you need to think about those things, because your employees don't have the same reaction as you do. They don't have the same kind of background. They don't understand even your physical demeanor in the same way. I remember in one of my first work experience in the Gulf, there was a very, very nice gentleman, I'm not going to say, but who was working with me. And he was always saying yes to everything that I was asking. Yes, Miss Sandrine, yes, Miss Sandrine, yes, Miss Sandrine. And then he wasn't doing it. And one day I was talking about him with one of my other team members saying, I don't know what to do with this gentleman. I keep asking him, he never says no, but then I'm having problems with the delivery and so on. And he told me, Sandrine, in his culture, if you don't scream at him and shout at him and show your face to be angry, he's not taking you serious and you're always smiling. And so he thinks it's not important what you're asking of him. I said, but I'm just being polite, you know, and that's just who I am. And he said, you need to scream at him. No, I don't want to. And after debating with myself, I said, I'm going to try because I'm here. I need to learn. And this gentleman was from another nationality than the one we were talking about. And I did. And I said, I'm not happy. You're not doing the work, blah, blah, blah. And miraculously, everything changed. I was like, oh. And, you know, that's not the stuff that you learn in the cultural courses when you become an expat, which, by the way, I didn't have. And nobody could have prepared me for that. But those are the things. So I would say that the managers in the semi-gov entities who are completely diverse and in the multinationals are very, very open to different cultures. And then in the private companies, it really depends how the management of that private company has decided to staff the company, all people coming from one part of the world, or if it's more diverse, then it makes a different mindset, I would say.
So how does this cascade into the rewards picture? I mean, are there different practices that we need to take into place when we're dealing with a very diverse workforce?
No, not really. But what you see is different pay levels. Like the nationality has a huge impact on the amount of pay that somebody is going to get. So, but basically, because you don't find people from different nationalities mixing on the same jobs, like you don't see many Westerners in a junior white collar position, you know, like a clerk in an officer, because we would be too expensive and nobody's going to hire us when they could hire an Egyptian, an Indian, a Filipino for much, much less, who would still be happy, make enough money to sustain their family and so on. So you don't really see a mix of those nationalities in the different types of jobs, but there is still a massive pay differential between Westerners, Arabs, and Asians. And Westerners / Emiratis, because the Emiratis are paid the same or more.
And have you worked with multinationals that have struggled with that approach? Because, you know, there's, for instance, if they have coming from a different country, maybe Western country, that they're concerned about pay fairness among different racial groups, and but given like you said, they may be in a singular race in a particular job, that might not be as much of an issue.
So, we do talk of diversity and inclusion in the region, but very differently from what I read in the US.
Yeah.
First of all, LGBTQ, forget about it. It's illegal in most of the Gulf countries. So there's not even a discussion about it. Okay. We talk about parity between men and women. We talk about parity between UAE nationals and expats, because in the beginning of career in the private sector, there could actually be a disadvantage to the Emiratis in terms of pay level. And we talk of disparity of pay between government jobs and private jobs for the Emiratis. So at the moment, this is mostly about that. And then a lot of work about inclusion from a cultural point of view, but not so much from a pay point of view. Groups of activities per types of interest, per maybe type regional nationality, let's say, generally speaking, and so on. So it's a different concept than what we have. I think the multinationals the likes of, I don't know, GE and Microsoft and all those big companies are probably more diverse already because they tend to hire not so much by nationality, and their jobs tend to be more like kind of higher level of individual contributors, salespeople, and so on. So they're probably more diverse in the origins of the people they have working for them, because they don't have, you know, a few thousand laborers or people who are manufacturing steel or aluminum or stuff like that. You know? So
I see. Well, back to your slide here, when we were talking about people under stress, and there's been a lot of that over the past few years, right? The pandemic, turnover, or, you know, work-life balances, inflation, and so forth. So how have the Gulf countries handled these issues, and what have they been experiencing there?
So it's been very interesting. There is a taboo in the Muslim world about mental health. Mental health was associated with psychiatric disease and being, old word, crazy, okay? So it was very, very taboo. You were not talking of being depressed. You were not talking of being anxious. You were talking of being overworked or stressed, but that was like stress, work-related stress, nothing else. So obviously with COVID, that kind of bubble completely busted. And now companies are much more open to discuss about psychological well-being, not just physical well-being, which was until now what well-being was about, was physical well-being only. You know, like stuff like steps challenge and take the stairs and eat some apples instead of some bad snacks and all this kind of stuff. There has also been another big shift, which is the openness to talk about financial well-being and financial education, which was another big taboo. I remember, so my last corporate job, I was the head of performance and reward for Mubadala, which is one of the sovereign wealth funds of Abu Dhabi. And I said at some point, I think we should implement, you know, we should ask our bank, the company bank, to come. And because we were helping new incoming expats to open a bank account when they were arriving. So I said, with the bank with which we are working, we should ask them to come and make one or two presentations on how to manage a budget, why it's important to pay back your credit card, you know, basic stuff. And one of my colleagues, an Emirati colleague in HR, said to me, no, Sandrine, it's none of our business. We don't have to tell people that they have debt and so on. I said, we're not telling them. First of all, it's voluntary. And it's just education. It's for free. And we're not selling anything. We're not saying to people you're doing bad. We're not checking who's coming. It's just, and I was not able to put that in place. And now everybody's putting this kind of stuff in place. So COVID has brought two massive changes in terms of well-being. Is the mental, emotional well-being and the financial well-being as well. And I think it's a step in the right direction. I hope that companies will continue and will embrace that and will extend it and continue to develop it. Not everybody has put that in place, but there's been a massive progress in the last 2 years on that aspect.
What about pay rates over the past few years? I mean, we've, you know, the world here is in a lot of the Western, United States and in Europe, there's countries that are being impacted by inflation and increasing pay rates. What about the Gulf states? Yes, so I have actually a few slides for you. We saw incentives actually. We saw that last year. So this is coming from, I think that was Mercer, I'm not sure, that the actual incentives were paid the same as target last year, except for executives who received a little bit less than their target. And the pay movements are anticipated to be at around 3 to 4% across the Gulf countries. So it's less than inflation.
there is, we are seeing inflation come up. And I want to share one interesting slide actually with you before I get into this detail. This one is definitely coming from TRS survey results from Mercer. Now, it's the same in Saudi Arabia. I've seen their presentation in Saudi Arabia, and I suspect it's the same in the other Gulf countries, though I've not seen the presentations, but I think it's the same. And I find this one very interesting. I don't know if you can see my mouse moving, so I'm circling. Yeah, okay. So as you can see here, the little dots, we have same incumbents 2020 and 2021, and their salary moved up by 2.3% for the professionals, but it moved minus 3% in the general market. And the same for managers, they got 1.5 same incumbents year on year, but the market moved down by 3%, minus 8% for support functions. So what we see happening here, and I'm going to advance an interpretation. I've not seen statistics. Statistics are very difficult to come by in this part of the world, but I know the country now. I've been here very long. I think what we see is that when times are good in this part of the world, so as I was saying, you have Westerners in managerial positions, you have regional Arabs and Indians and Filipinos in the kind of office positions, and you have subcontinental Indians and Bangladeshi and Nepali and so on, and Pakistani in the labor positions. When times are bad, expensive expats get booted, okay, they're replaced by regional Arabs. And then when times get better, the regional Arabs get booted and they're replaced by the Westerners again. So I think what we see, and this has happened a number of times already, I've been here. So when I first arrived in the UAE, it was 2007. The economy was booming. I had never seen any. I come from Europe, you know. For us, a fantastic year was when we were getting 2.93% growth. Everybody was like, yo, let's celebrate. I arrived in UAE, it was booming. There were cranes everywhere. I was recruiting, you know, senior executives in the construction and real estate. And as part of my job, I was negotiating all the packages for executives. And they were coming to me and they were saying, I want $15 million over the next 2 years. And I was like, okay, how about 100,000 dirhams per month? You know, it had nothing to do with what they wanted. I mean, it was crazy. Okay. And then global crisis happened. Okay. And it was the first time actually that the UAE and the whole Gulf had been so incorporated into global economy. So previous crisis of 2000 had not affected this part of the world because it was still very much insular. But in 2008, 2009, we were affected by the global crisis. All of a sudden, everything crumbled. None of the local companies knew how to react to a crisis, and they started firing people left, right, and center. You know, it was a disaster. They didn't have money to pay the end of service benefits that they were, the gratuity that they were supposed to pay to the people. I mean, it was terrible. And they fired all those expensive Westerners, replaced them. And then later on, when market went better, they brought the Westerners back. And then 2014, 15, oil price crashed down. If you remember, price of oil was negative. Everybody was like, whoa, what's going on? Yeah. And we went into free fall. So we were highly affected in this part of the world, obviously, by that. Excuse me. And there was the same movement of balance, you know, between replacing populations. But in this crisis, governments have learned a lesson and they implemented things very quickly, like don't fire people. If you can't pay them, keep them in the country, maintain their housing allowance. You cannot put them out in the street because they can't go. And we were all locked, you know, you remember. The other thing is when you have 90% of your population is made of people who are not your national citizens and they want to go back to take care of their family back home. I mean, it was a very unique situation. So I've seen these movements coming up and down. And so when I see an overall market movement of minus 3%, I think actually new hires are hired a lot less than minus 3% compared to the existing incumbents. Existing incumbents had something of an increase in 2021 because they had nothing in 2020, most of them. So some of them received a little bit of something. But what we see is potentially as well replacing, even within the same, let's say, category of expats, maybe that I don't know, and maybe a Filipino is more expensive or less expensive than an Indian. So if you replace, by another nationality, you're still making a saving on the salary. So this is what we saw initially, but then we had the same as in the US, a great resignation. So great resignation for us has been a bit different. It was a lot of expats lost their job and said, I'm out of here. Why? We had this expatodus, as it was called, the exodus of the expats, because when you're an expat, your health insurance is tied to having a job. The paying for the education of the children, your kids are not allowed to go in the local public sector education. And let's be honest, even if they were, probably most parents wouldn't want to put their kids, because most of the nationals also put their own kids, if they can, in the private sector for a better education. So you have people who are there considering, I'm out of my country, my family is far away, I don't have a job, I can't pay for the education of my kids, which can cost, if you have a teenage kid, to put them into an American school, $60,000 just for tuition fees for one child. Yes. 85 easily, okay? Not counting all the activities, the uniforms, the canteen, whatever. It's super, super expensive. I can't pay for my healthcare. As soon as the borders open, let's go back home. In my home country, I get free education for my kids. I get free healthcare. Maybe not the Americans, but the non-Americans, we do get that. So, we saw that kind of exodus. We saw an exodus of laborers and so on, were replaced by other laborers, but not at the same rate. And so, what we've seen as well is that because for the first time, the labor market was closed, in the sense that you were not able to import as many people from other countries. And in the past, employers were like, I want this duck with 3 legs and a horn, and they were able to find a duck with 3 legs and a horn, because in the whole world you would find one. There is one, you will find them, okay? But when your borders are closed and all of a sudden you have to only look at the labor pool inside your own country for the first time in the labor history in that country, all of a sudden, what happened? We saw, first of all, the nationals start to move from one job to another to get salary increases. Like as often as every 6 months, to the point that, for example, in Saudi Arabia, government had to put out a decree that it was not allowed for a Saudi national to change job from one semi-gov entity to another semi-gov entity if they had less than 1 year on the job. So they put a law because those guys were changing jobs all the time. You also see a lot of the lower paid people, so not the laborers, but let's say food and beverage, retail, hospitality, will jump for just a few hundred dirhams, so $25, $50 a month, they will jump job. Okay, so we've seen more of that. And we have seen also, unfortunately, I would say, that some companies have wanted to revert to the old way of working. Everybody's back in the office, you're back under micromanagement, because there is a lot of micromanagement in the middle management in this part of the world, except maybe in the multinationals and a few companies. And they didn't realize that when people have been working from home for 2 years, whether they like it or they don't like it, they probably enjoy the agency that they got, the fact that they can, even if I'm the woman and I still need to take care of the kids, it's still a very traditional environment in this part of the world. So a lot of women exited the world, the job market as well, because of the pressure to look after the kids and so on. But a lot of people appreciated that they didn't have to commute, appreciated that they could work on a time that was better for them. And a lot of companies don't seem to have realized that in our part of the world. Some have, I don't want to say 100%, but I've been a bit shocked a few times when I visited some office towers, and I saw like some places where people are packed, you know, on those huge tables where there are 8 people sitting on one side, 8 people sitting in front of them. They can touch each other just by moving their elbow, you know, like they don't even have. And I'm like, whoa, I know we don't have as much COVID in this part of the world. It's been very much under control because they've been very strict with the vaccine and the mask mandates. I mean, there's been no joking with that. Nobody has said, no, it's my freedom not to wear the mask. You don't want to wear the mask, go back to your country. You know, we don't have that freedom for that kind of stuff here, which, like it or not, in the end, I mean, we have 300 cases of COVID at the moment per day. We don't have hundreds of thousands, you know. So I think we faced as well that kind of movement. And what we're seeing now is also inflation is coming up. Ukraine is having a massive impact because a lot of countries in this part of the world, not so much the Gulf, but if you think Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, so on, are really dependent on wheat coming from Ukraine and on sunflower oil as well, which is also coming a lot from Ukraine and Russia. And so those two basic staples, because those are cultures of bread. I mean, it's not the same bread as French baguette. It's a flat bread, but still it's the culture of bread. It's not culture of rice. Are still dependent on that. And we've seen prices come up. So there is pressure to increase salaries, but we're not yet at levels of inflation. We're still below the 5% mark for the time being. So there is not yet talk of bigger salary increase budgets or anything like that. The people are watching because they know they will get pressure. HR people are watching, but we're taking an eye.
What about the supply and demand of labor? Are you seeing more migration or some changes?
So they started reopening the market to certain nationalities to come in. But it's still not as easy. I mean, in the past, you know, you were coming from certain countries, you would come on a tourist visa, you had a 90-day to 180 days that you could stay there, you would look for a job, then you would take a bus to Oman, come back and be hired. You know, in the meantime, there was a visa run that was called. It's not as easy as it used to be. The market is still not there. Companies still have, even if the market is officially reopened, they don't get as many visas as they used to for people to come up from outside. So companies are much more trying to recruit from inside the country or from the GCC, because it's people who already know. Each of our countries has a slightly different culture, but once you've been in UAE, you understand Saudi, or you understand Kuwait, if you've been in Qatar and so on. So you kind of can understand.
Yeah, so I imagine that's put some pressure on internal development plans and education. Has that employee training?
Yeah, sure. Just a few years ago, as I was working with a client, and I was kind of embedded with the client for almost over a year, I remember a conversation with the head of L&D, and this person told me, I don't understand why expats are asking for training. And I said, she was an Emirati, obviously. And I said to her, well, you know, everybody wants to maintain their employability. And she said, yes, but we hire you because you're supposed to know how to work. And I said, the world is changing and we all need to keep updating ourselves and so on. So I would say things have changed. There is a huge focus because budgets are not that big the focus is mostly on the nationals, the development of nationals. Also because the nationals tend to be young, so they have more to learn because they're in the beginning of their career. Although even the old dogs like me, they still need to learn new tricks. But I mean, still, when you're in the beginning of your career, you have even more to learn. And I think the main change is that has been opened through learning management systems where a lot of companies have taken like Coursera and similar things, and where employees can access and do their personal development on their own time through online, rather than going into a classroom and through something paid for specifically by the employer. Two exceptions: anything that touches AI and digitization, those are the magic words at the moment, and everybody goes to training if they say those two words. But if they don't, if they say I need to learn Copenhagen, for example, too bad.
So tell me, Sandrine, with the different things as part of the workforce experience. I mean, there's pay and benefits, of course. There's work-life balance, there's flexibility, and so forth. Out of all that in the Gulf countries, what is the most dominant, or what's asked for by employees? What is most top of mind for them?
Yeah, I think people are asking mostly for three things: flexible working hours, working from home, even if it's not all the time, and also education subsidies. Those are the three most requested benefits as per a survey, for new hires. Whether they get them or not, that's a different story, but that's what they want. So I guess it depends on the company. So one of my friends recently started a job at a startup, and they mostly work remotely, okay? One of my other friends is working for hospitality, and everybody's almost back in offices except some corporate HQ people. So I guess it really depends. But one of the things that, and especially in the UAE, that I think has been really, really good is that the government is reacting. I was telling you before we started the conversation, at a speed which, for me, a person coming from the old continent, I'm French, and the French tend to be like pretty much dramatic every time you try to touch on anything that they have, changed it years with us. In the UAE, it's like tack, 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 and it's changed. So on 13th of December, I think, government said, hey, by the way, as of 2nd of January, the whole government is moving its weekend from Friday, Saturday to Saturday, Sunday. And we will also finish working at 12:30 on Friday afternoon. So basically, we're implementing the 4.5 day work week for all federal government employees. And dear private sector, you decide what you want to do. And you imagine on 13th of December, you have to decide what you have to do for 2nd of Jan with Christmas vacation in the middle. Okay. Now, statistics show that about 80% of companies have moved to Saturday, Sunday weekend to be adapted to global markets. I personally have not moved my weekend to Saturday, Sunday. I've kept Friday, Saturday, because at the moment, my biggest client is in Saudi Arabia, and they're still on Friday, Saturday. But when my work with them is finished, I will probably, although I kind of like to be a little bit different. It's good in terms of going out and so on. But most people have moved to this weekend. They also said, oh, by the way, so they've introduced in the last 2 years all sorts of different ways of working: remote work visa, expat retiring, investor. They've expanded the opportunity to get UAE citizenship. They've put freelancer visas, lots and lots of things, and a new labor law in the UAE since the 2nd of February. Which has made quite a few massive changes, but the two of the most important one, no one can be on a permanent illimited contract by the end of the year. The companies have 1 year to change everyone's contract to fixed-term contracts that last for a maximum of 3 years. They are renewable as many times as you want, but it's now maximum 3 years. And what they've done is that before it was virtually impossible to let go an employee. So there are new legal conditions for termination. So you can now lose your job more easily in a way, but there are also many more protections for the employees that have been put in there. And the employees can also resign much more easily, because before they were kind of stuck, in this system. And lots of new employee protections against bullying, harassment, discrimination when the woman is pregnant, wage protection, and all this kind of stuff. New leaves, but most importantly, I have them, new ways of working. So they've introduced part-time work, temporary work, freelancing, shared jobs, all sorts of different ways of working that were not legal before. You could not hire people on a part-time basis before. It was not legal. So they are really moving into this direction of saying, we understand companies need the flexibility. People want the flexibility. Let us bring it to the market. So for me, that's really a positive sign. Yes. And I'm telling about the UAE, obviously, because I'm based in Dubai, but if you look at, they're all trying, all the different countries in the region are trying to modernize their system. Saudi Arabia also is trying. They're coming from further back, I would say, so they have still some catch up to do, but there's a lot of improvement there as well, no matter what you think of other things in the country. Sure. But for example, but you also see that there's kind of a regional co-petition, as they call it. Okay? So Saudi government said, hey, dear multinationals, if you want to make deals with the government as of 2020, I don't remember, 3 or 4, you need to have your regional headquarters in Saudi Arabia. Most of them are situated in the UAE, because let's be honest, it's the one which is more developed and most Western friendly in terms of lifestyle. So obviously a few companies immediately jumped and said, yes, boss, we will open a regional headquarters in the region. How that will affect the relationship with UAE? Bahrain is trying to establish itself, has been for a few years already, as a financial hub, but Dubai is catching up like big time on that. So you can see they're all trying. They're making reforms to their kafala system, which is where the person has to be sponsored by the employer. And for example, in the UAE now, it is written in the law that the employer cannot take the passport of the employee, that the employer cannot ask the employee to pay the recruitment fees or anything like that. Still, agencies are doing it, but not the employers. So agencies, not everywhere, obviously, but in certain countries, people still have to pay $10,000, $15,000 to go. They're told magnificent lies of how much they're going to be paid, and they're paid 200 euros a month, and they're basically enslaved through the debt. So not to the employer, but to the agencies, the illegal recruitment agencies, unfortunately. So we still see a lot of positive change. It's still not perfect, but I think also there was Expo, the World Expo that just finished in Dubai. There is going to be the World Cup of football in Qatar at the end of the year. Those have been like massive spotlights on working conditions, especially for the more disadvantaged parts of society. And so that has pushed for a lot of change on the sponsorship system, making sure that people get paid, making sure that people receive their gratuity, and so on. So yeah, it's ever changing. And
yeah, that's great. I mean, it's good to hear that these governments can increase their agility so much and yes, have such rapid improvement. So I think that lays out for a good model for other countries to follow suit and moving quickly. So I know we'd love to see more of that.
Yeah, when you have a sheikh at the top who says, I want this done.
Gets done.
And basically that's his country.
Yeah.
Gets it done, you know.
That's
So
right.
that goes very quick. But also I have to say, the countries can change so rapidly because the population is so young. And the younger you are, the easier change is. I mean, let's be honest. I don't want to say we're all still young, but probably for us change is a little bit more difficult than 2 years ago, let's just say. So when we were babies. So you know, that's also the reality. So I think this is society where you see, for example, mobile phone penetration. On average, there are more than 2 mobile phones per person.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So for everybody, and you see the laborers, they have very good phones. It's very strange because they depend on it for everything. So they don't have a computer, they don't have a tablet, but they have a high-end phone where they can do whatever, their banking, communication with the family, everything is done there. Yeah, so it's very technologically friendly in this part of the world because the population is young. Because for those who have enough means, you know, there is a whole effect of trendiness as well. You want to have the latest iPhone.
Yes.
Because you know, we're a bit flashy in the Gulf. Let's be honest.
Yes.
We get we're the bestest.
Yeah. Well, Sandrine, I know we're out of time. I mean, it's at the top of the hour, so sure. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you and getting all your perspective and this brilliance that you're sharing from the Gulf states and so forth. But can you tell us a little bit more? So if a person is looking for advice in that area and would like to learn more, how can they contact you and to get your assistance?
So they will find me on LinkedIn. I'm very present on LinkedIn, and they can email me at Sandrine, SANDRINE at compensationinsider.com, which is the name of my blog. Please subscribe. So yeah, that's the best way to reach me, by email or LinkedIn. And I'm always happy. I have lots and lots of conversations with people. Of course, I get paid for my services. I'm a consultant, but I do a lot of free advice, you know, conversations and helping people as much as I can.
Well, thank you so much, Sandrine. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been really nice talking with you. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Bye, everyone. See you next month.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.